welcome to the Week in Focus and to Sid Cordell. And Sid, will Rishi stay? Will he get? I mean, it's Machiavellian nights and days, isn't it now? There's all sorts of excuses coming out, all sorts of people there saying, Penny Mordaunt, I can't think of anything worse, can you?
No, absolutely. You see, basically what's going on is that the powers that be, or deep state, whatever you want to call it, want basically to bring Penny Mordaunt in because she is the most left-wing woke leader that the Conservative Party could possibly have. So they would love her to be Conservative leader because basically if she was Conservative leader and the choice was between Conservative and Labour, it would be basically no choice at all because, Penny Mordaunt and Keir Starmer basically have the same policies. It's only people like Boris Johnson and Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman, these sort of people that have actually got different policies. Now, Rishi Sunak sits somewhere in the middle. Very, very unclear what he stands for, very unreliable, can blow with the wind. But he's certainly better than Penny Mordaunt. I mean, at least Penny Mordaunt's not going to blow with the wind. She's just going to pursue a terrible agenda.
Yeah, it's remarkable how the press build these people up or wind people up because, I mean, she's the great queen for holding swords in front of Charles's coronation. She's the one that's part of the Royal Navy. Let's be honest. I mean, she's in Dad's army of the Royal Navy, isn't she? She's not a permanent fixture. She turns out half a dozen times a year for a couple of hours of training or whatever they do. But this is where the media are. They, no, I won't say distort, but they have an agenda.
Well, that's right. You see, and the thing is, because she's popular with the media, there's some Conservative MPs who think, oh, this will give us a more popular leader, and I'm more likely to retain my seat if we have a more popular leader. So let's get rid of Rishi Sunak, who's unpopular with the media or not so popular with the media, and bring in Penny Mordaunt, and there's a greater chance I'm going to hold my seat. That's what they're thinking. But it's just, politicians should be principled, frankly. I mean, this is what we've had with Lee Anderson. At least we've got a politician who's principled and who's basically saying, look, I mean, my principles, basically, I'm not willing to sacrifice. I'm not willing to go along to the whip and apologise for saying that Sadiq Khan is in the hands of Muslim extremists. I'm not going to apologise for saying it because he's very clearly influenced by Muslim extremists. There's massive evidence for it. So I'm not going to apologise for saying something for which is blatantly true. And so it's like, okay, well, won't be a Conservative MP anymore. Okay, well, if I can't be a Conservative MP, then I'll go to Reform where I'm welcome. And, he's basically stood on principle. And that's what all politicians should do. All politicians should say, principles come first. Pragmatism comes second. But, in this situation now, they're looking at possibly losing their seats and they're saying, oh, no, we've got to be pragmatic. We must try and hold on to power. And this is the best way of holding on to power. And they're probably wrong, frankly. I mean, the Conservative Party is already being laughed at for having 3 different leaders over this parliament. If they're then going to get rid of Rishi Sunak and have 4 different leaders, that would just be ridiculous.
Well, they're all jumping ship, aren't they? There's nearly 100 now between the various parties that are not going to stand in the next election. And they've seen the writing on the wall. And resilience is a word that is foreign to them completely. And it highlights what you just said, basically. Who are they acting for? Are they acting for their town and village and area? No, they're thinking of themselves. Well, I'm going to go anyway. I'll jump ship now. 60 odd of them are Tories. They're the leading party at the moment. The rest are a mixture of other parties. But I repeat, Sid, there's no resilience anymore. It's all thinking about yourself, not the people that elected you.
Well, yes, but you see, actually, what you're saying, if it's 60 Conservatives are going to stand down and 40 others, that's roughly the correct proportion as it is in Parliament at the moment, 60 to 40. So that's not that surprising. But you see, once someone's been a member of Parliament, they acquire a certain status, and it's relatively easy then to get jobs and get positions. I mean, we've seen this with Matt Hancock, for instance, where, since standing down, he's managed to get lots of different positions within different companies and so on and so forth. And that's commonplace. Now, it was quite interesting, you see, when I was in Sheffield. Sheffield Hallam was a Conservative seat for quite a long time. It was then won by Richard Allen, who became the Lib Dem MP for the area. And he worked very hard. He got the seat. After a relatively short time, he basically said, I want to leave Parliament while I can do something useful with my life. That was actually what he said. He was a Lib Dem MP. And he gave his seat to Nick Clegg, and the rest, I guess, is history. But that's what happened. Now, it makes you think, doesn't it? Somebody who's been in Parliament for I think he was in Parliament for about 8 or 9 years, suddenly says, I see no purpose in this. I see no purpose in being a member of Parliament. I'm not doing anything useful with my life. I want to leave. Well, I can still do something useful with my life. And while I'm talking like this, by the way, one of the things that really shocked me as a young man, I mean, I was a Conservative councillor from age 26 to 32. And when I was a new councillor, so at that time I would have been just 26, I'd have been a new councillor, we had a visit to Sheffield from the Secretary of State for Education, who at that time was Sir Keith Joseph. And during his visit to Sheffield, he had a meeting with the members of the Conservative Party who were on the Education Committee in Sheffield. And that included me as a new councillor. I was on the Education Committee. So I met the Secretary of State for Education. And we're sat in a committee room in Sheffield, in the town hall. And one of the first things he said to us was, wow, letting out a big sigh. We must be mad doing this, mustn't we? And I looked at him and I thought, you're where I want to be, a member of the Parliament, a member of the Cabinet, a senior member of the Cabinet indeed, and you hate what you're doing. And it made me think, frankly. And I tell you one thing it made me do as a young person, I mean, as 26, I thought I am not going to compromise my beliefs in order to get into a position, to get into Parliament, to try and get into the Cabinet. There's no purpose in it. The only purpose is to stand for what you believe in and to put forward what you believe in. And in my case, stand for God and put forward Christian principles. That's the only purpose of being in politics.
Right, broken Parliament, broken MPs. Let's go for broken Britain. And everybody recognise that. There are other countries with the same problems, but certainly Britain stands out there. Doesn't the G7, we're the worst productivity nation going by a country mile. Gen Z shirkers are commonplace. They don't want to go back to work. And something that really highlights this, actually, that's just been revealed about last August bank holiday, when there was a breakdown in the air traffic control. And it caused 700,000 people to be late, or even in some cases to cancel their holidays that they booked for, paid for. And it all went down to working remotely. And it was an IT problem. And the guy took an hour and a half to get in, by which time there were miles of queues, aircraft and people. And it's cost the country a fortune. Of course, the lovely Michael, Sir Michael of Ryanair, was out of his cage, quite rightly so. He got one thing right. He says, £100 million I pay to the airports in Britain in a year. Is this the service I come to expect? Why I mention this is the fact that we now want to go to a 4-day week. With all our problems, Sid, We now want to go to a 4-day week. We don't want to work. My goodness me, you can sympathise sometimes with people saying, allow the illegal and legal immigrants in. At least they want to work.
Well, it's interesting, you see. I'm sorry to go back to what I was saying before, but you see, it's quite interesting. I was just reading about Lee Anderson, and his background is in the mines. He was a miner. His father was a miner. His grandfather was a miner. He was a miner as a young man. And he actually said that when I think it was actually his girlfriend, I'm afraid, that he got pregnant, he said, I got this woman pregnant, and I basically went to the mine and I said, I've got to work an extra day. I'm going to have to work Sundays because, I need some more money. So he then started working 6 days a week instead of 5 days a week because he needed extra money. And one of the things he said is the work ethic these days is just gone. But he said what ought to happen is that people need to take responsibility and need to work. And if you need more money, you work harder. That is how it should operate. One of the problems is, interesting enough, one of the things that they told me with the health service is when Tony Blair, God bless him, decided to greatly increase the pay of GPs, he said what happened is that the majority of GPs started to work 3 days or 4 days a week instead of working 5 days a week because they could now work 3 or 4 days a week and get the same pay that they could get previously on 5 days a week. So they thought, I don't need to work 5 days anymore. I'll just work 3 or 4 days and I can get the same pay. Now, you see, it's interesting, because this then had a big effect on the health service. It had a big effect on the way GPs operated. It made it very difficult for people to get GP appointments and so on and so forth. And it just goes to show that just giving people big pay rises is not the answer to the health service or the answer to any business. People have got to earn their pay. And if people earn their pay and work harder, then they should be rewarded.
Well, let's stick with the health service because certain things are coming out. And let's think of the immigrants that come in to help the health service out and to rescue the health service. And let's look at facts. Now, one fact is that we need home care workers. And for our old people's homes, etc., we are desperate. And it's poorly paid. Just over £20,000 a year is the average care worker's wage on a private basis. That's all the employers are able to pay to keep the cost of weekly costs down. And you look at what the NHS are offering, and this is so crafty and so typical of the NHS. They have 9 pay bands in the NHS, and the lowest is care workers. And it's not popular activity, apparently. But the band that starts off, band 2, strangely, for home care workers in the NHS, starts off at just over 20,000. So you think, well, that's fair, until you look at the add-ons. And it's not 20,000, it's 30,000 that a NHS worker gets paid exactly the same work and probably actually a bit less than the private sector within the care services. Now, that's just one entitlement the NHS has got for itself, apart from the one that you've mentioned about doctors. It's a scandal, the NHS, and it's come out again this week about how much are being paid, and people whistleblowing all over the place. And one of the whistleblowers, as a nurse, gave a day in the life of and who she has to consult. The middle band of management and the higher band of management are doing very little except causing problems, bureaucratic problems. The things she has to refer to them are a nonsense. It takes an amateur with common sense to reach the same conclusion. And yet, if she goes to a manager, which she's obliged to do, that manager is paid sometimes over £100,000 a year. This is massive job creation. They are doing very little except creating their own job. Sid, this is grade 9 on the scale, by the way, which is the top grade. There's a super top grade. You can earn £500,000 and more. There's your problem with the NHS. The NHS, I'm sorry, is not there to help you and me, the sick, you and me. It's there to help themselves in many, many cases. And it's irreformable. It's got to be completely ditched, but nobody's got the political will or courage to do it.
Okay, but you see, this is why we like GP fund holding, you see, because in GP fund holding, it brings an element of competition into it. Because if people don't know how it works, this worked in the 1990s. So we're not talking about something that hasn't been tried. It tried and worked very well. But you see, with GP fund holding, GPs are basically given the money and then they buy the operations from the hospitals. But they can actually go to different hospitals and the hospitals have to quote for how much the operations will cost. So the GPs can obviously go to the hospital that offers the cheapest price. Now, and what the consultant said to me in the 1990s is that now we know how much things cost. Before we had no idea how much each operation cost. And because there's an element of competition, we have to be on our mettle and work to make sure that we get the operations that the hospital requires. And the whole thing operated way more efficiently. You see, Tony Blair got rid of it, not because it wasn't working, but purely for political reasons, and went back to the situation where people just go to hospital and no one's got any idea how much anything costs. It's just basically a whole thing is a complete bottomless pit. And the problem in that environment, people can work very hard and not get rewarded, and people can do hardly any work at all and just pick up their pay because it's, that's the standard of what they get. But what's interesting now is that in the last budget, Jeremy Hunt brought in this massive new investment. He talked about £4 billion investment into new computer systems to streamline the whole administration. Now, that will make the going back to GP fund holding much easier because there is administration involved in it, obviously. But if you have the whole thing computerized properly, then it'll make it much easier, make the whole process much easier. Now, what must happen with this investment is that the number of staff are reduced. The admin staff are reduced because you won't need them because you've got this new computer investment. So the GP should be able to just go everything just straight onto the computer, transfer from the computer to the hospital, and the administration in the hospital should be streamlined. The consultants in the hospital should just be able to go straight onto the computer, see what they've been referred to, and plan their operations. So we should be able to get rid of a whole load of hospital administrators. Now, unfortunately, what tends to happen is that these new computer systems are brought in and no jobs are lost. We just have the same number of administrators as before. They just work less. Now, that can't happen, or if it does happen, it'll be a disaster, frankly. But it's the same. It's the same in the civil service. We brought in a whole load of new computer systems in the civil service to streamline the civil service, make it more efficient. But instead of actually reducing the number of jobs, they increase the jobs all the time. There's no streamlining that takes place. And somebody or a powerful leader needs to get hold of it and basically say, look, we've got new computer systems in place. We've got to cut the number of jobs and make the whole thing more efficient. By the way, while I'm talking about this, it's quite interesting that Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, I believe, Lara Trump, has actually just taken over the Republican National Committee in America. And the first thing she did when she took over the Republican National Committee was get rid of about 60 jobs. Because it was basically, look, we got too many jobs. This organization is too fat. It's not achieving what we need to achieve. We can get rid of 60 jobs and make the whole thing far more efficient. Now, You see, that's bringing in a business person into a operation and basically applying business principles to it. And that's what we need to do properly to the NHS and to the civil service.
Talking about business principles and talking about the Tory party, who are supposed to be for business. No, they're not. And we can't talk about the Tory party anyway, really. Certainly haven't been able to for the last 14 years because we ain't got one. I will make an exception. There are 60 approximate members of the Tory government that are actually true Tories. What's going to happen to them? Goodness only knows. They are supposed to be for an employer. The biggest employer in the United Kingdom collectively is the small business, medium to small businesses. And they have absolutely stymied them during their power in subtle ways. What's come out this week is that 1 in 3 people applying for a job lasts less than 90 days. They get fed up. Oh, I don't like it. I didn't realise, and they're off. Now, that may seem a little innocuous until you look at the bureaucracy involved these days, and certainly put on steroids by the Tories. The form filling in, the compliance, the work rules, the pension benefits. There are about 30 things that an employer has to go through in bureaucratic paperwork, and it's all wasted. And the big companies love it because they've got big HR departments that can easily cope with all this legislation and law changing. The small man can't. On top of that, you've got a minimum wage which is higher than it's ever been. The Tories putting in a minimum wage like this, Labour wouldn't have been allowed to get away with it. That people say, oh, they're socialists, they're all for the workers. What do you expect? The Tories have done themselves no favours, and they've done the workhorse of our businesses no favours. This is where the wealth is generated, Sid, and it's been neglected. And the mockery is, last week it was announced that I think it was 200 million was available for companies to help them out, small companies, but most of it's going to IT and other similar things that are not relevant to the vast majority of those companies.
Yes. Now, you see, what's going on is that when ministers come into government, a lot of ministers just basically go to the senior civil servants and basically say, right, okay, what are we going to do? What do you want me to do? And the senior civil servant says, well, you know, we've got all these plans. You've got these plans in force and they're all extremely advanced and you mustn't stop this and you mustn't stop that because if you stop this or you stop that, it'll be. And so they just say, oh, yes, okay, fine, fair enough. Yeah, we'll continue with these plans. So when a new government comes into power, very little changes because the civil service control what they do. Now, you have to remember, of course, there are thousands and thousands of civil servants and the number of ministers is probably 5 or 6. So it's very difficult for them to take on the civil service. So it's not easy at all. And of course, we have a minister, a strong minister, for instance, like Dominic Raab, who comes in and says, right, you know, we're going to do things differently now. This is what we're going to do. And then the civil service start putting in a series of complaints that he's a bully and that he's been bullying the staff and so on and so forth. So Dominic Raab is then, stymied attacked in the media. He's suspended and so on and so forth because of allegations of bullying that have been made against him. You know, what planet are we on? You know, this is the minister, the elected minister, who's in charge of the department, and they're attacking him for allegedly bullying and basically saying, we're not having this man in charge because he's too strong. I mean, but that just goes to show the extent to which the civil service rule the whole process. Now, the only way to combat it is to have or have a strong government from the top down. In other words, have a very strong prime minister, and who then puts in place strong ministers, and the strong ministers make the decisions. I mean, we've seen with James Cleverly. James Cleverly is so weak; it's not true. I mean, he's the sort of person that you just bring in just to keep everything rolling and not bring in any changes, and not, and whatever. And it's just like, it was different. It was very, very different in the days of Margaret Thatcher. You see, in the days of Margaret Thatcher, you had a very strong prime minister who controlled the civil service, and you'd normally have a minister that would come in and make substantial changes when they came in, to whatever was going on, whatever was being done. We saw dramatic changes take place in many government departments, and that was the norm under Margaret Thatcher. The norm at the moment is just to is for the civil service just to run everything, and the result of that also, you see, is that the civil service like creating new jobs, and they're always saying to the minister, "We need more money, we need new jobs here, new jobs there." So they're just mushrooming all the time. And we've seen it most obviously in Quangos, which we've talked about before. But you see, the fact is that, in 2010, Quangos were costing us 90 billion. They're now costing us 224 billion. That's which in real terms is an increase of 65 billion. In real terms, if you account for inflation. So in real terms, we're 65 billion pounds more. Why are we paying this 65 billion extra? It's all the civil service just creating jobs for themselves. That's all it is. It's not government. Government haven't come in. The Conservative Party haven't come in and said we want to increase the number of Quangos. It's just happened. The other thing you've talked about, by the way, that all this red tape, all that comes from the European Union. It doesn't, it's like, it's not, it doesn't come from Conservative Party policy. It wasn't in the Conservative manifesto, we're going to bring in some whole new regulations. It's all coming from the European Union. But instead of actually resisting the European Union and saying, no, we've left, we're not having anything to do with this red tape, part of the whole Windsor framework was an agreement that we will include all the EU regulations where we possibly can in British law, so that we can then have a soft border between the EU and the UK, because we'll be following the same regulations. That's what amounts to what the Windsor framework was saying. So instead of actually leaving the EU and having a bonfire all these regulations and making everything much simpler, we've just carried on as before. The civil service want all the regulations. We've got to just follow it all. And of course, they try to make it easy so that if we go back into the EU, which the Labour Party want us to do, then of course, well, we've been following all the regulations anyway when we were out of the EU. So going back in will be all very easy. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is undemocratic and nonsense, frankly.
Well, we're talking about billions. Let's talk about chicken feed. 8 billions is small compared to what you've just been talking about, but that's what's reckoned by HMRC, that's being pinched by universal creditors or debtors, whatever you want to call them. They're doing the system to £8 billion a year. So lots of money is provided to new civil servants that are going to take these people to task. Quite rightly, one says, there's enough skivers around and it's become an industry. And it goes further because even the pensioners, the grannies, are cheating. And they are going to be looked into, and the act has now gone through whereby the government can come and choose you as an old age pensioner and go and force you to reveal all your bank accounts and what's in them. Now, compared with 8 billion, this is only about 100 million, and it's reckoned they're going to get back. So this is low-hanging fruit, Sid. They're taking advantage of these rich pensioners. Gen Z seem to think the pensioners are rich. They're the underclass, Gen Z, and they deserve to be looked into. Now, there's looking into and looking into. Have the government got rights to get into your bank account?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. I mean, you see, the way government is going is it's becoming more and more powerful. And there's in some ways, I'm afraid, in very subtle ways, the West has been taking on the sort of society that you find in countries like Russia and China. Because in China, it's commonplace that the government can spy on everything, can spy on your bank account, can spy on what you're doing in your home, can spy, have cameras everywhere, and they'll freely arrest people that say anything against the state, let alone act against the state. You even just speak against the state. You speak against the state in your own home, and the state finds out what you say, and police come and arrest you. Now, that's not. We haven't been used to that sort of thing in the West, in Britain, in America. But suddenly, it's crept in subtly, and the fact that we're suddenly having bank accounts closed because of your political views. I mean, it's horrendous, but it's happening. And you sort of think, how on earth did that creep in? That somebody's bank account can be closed because of their political views. How did that creep in? And it's just like, I'll
Well,
tell
we,
you.
we, we should be blaming George Orwell for predicting all this, and he was mocked for years. Almost everything he wrote about 1984 is coming to pass now.
Well, yes, you see, but he was looking at the way communism was operating when he was writing, which I believe in the 1950s, 60s, when he was writing. And he was basically saying, this is how communism is operating now. I could see it starting to take over, even more than it is now. And, the trajectory that it's on is going to lead to this sort of thing, which is what he was predicting in 1984 in Animal Farm, etc. But yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. But you see, that sort of thing is commonplace in communist countries. And you almost expect it in communist countries because these systems are horrendous. But you don't expect it in democratic countries like the West. You just, and I'm afraid China has been spreading its tentacles all over the world. I mean, what is very clear, by the way, if people aren't clear, is that China dominates the World Health Organization. And it was very clear during the pandemic. The pandemic came from a lab in China, but we weren't allowed to say it. Anyone that said it was cancelled. And the World Health Organization was saying things like, there's no evidence of human to human transmission, when the pandemic was already rife in China. There was masses of evidence. They were lying to us, so we had false information being spread all over the world. And then they come along after the pandemic and say, oh, in the next pandemic, we're going to have a situation where all the decisions are taken by the World Health Organization, and the World Organization decides lockdowns for the whole world and vaccines for the whole world, treatments for the whole world, and everybody in the whole world has got to agree to comply by what the Health Organization says in order to control the pandemic. And you think, what?
Well, Sid, what's come out this week is truly frightening from what you're saying. That will only add to the fear. But the fact is that people were laughing, and you couldn't put anything on YouTube. If you were a dissenter, you were criticised. These people are now becoming heroes because they stepped up to the plate then. And one awful thing has come out of the Chinese incident, and it's cover up, cover up, cover up. That's what's been going on all the time with China and the WHO, as you've mentioned. It did come from Wuhan. It did come from a lab. Whether that lab was supported by US experimentation is another thing that no doubt will be revealed in due course, or is that just conspiracy? Let's put that on one side. Let's look at the facts. If a pandemic had to break out anywhere, the place you choose for controlling it was communist China, because they have the capability of shutting down a system, whereas the West doesn't. They could have shut down. But what did they do? That very week, when they knew the importance of the virus, they could have shut it down and stopped it spreading. But they had a conference that week. In fact, it wasn't a conference, it was a dinner. And there were 100,000 people at that dinner. That was the breeding ground. That's how it escaped. Now, this is awful, but it's true.
Yes, I know. Well, they actually stopped all flights, internal flights in China from Wuhan were stopped, but flights from Wuhan to the rest of the world weren't. So it was deliberately being spread all around the world, but it was all part of, of international control. I mean, this whole thing, this whole pandemic, I mean, is part of, creating the need for a one world government. And they're trying to create the World Health Organization as part of an arm of a new one world government. And China wants to control it. That's what's going on. But you see, it's interesting. You see that it seems that they had that meeting in Switzerland where basically all the governments agreed that, we've got to allow the World Health Organization to make all the decisions in a future pandemic. But it didn't happen in isolation. It didn't happen behind closed doors. So some people found out about it. And then people started protesting about the World Health Organization. And people started protesting in a number of Western governments. And all of a sudden, they had to back down. So it hasn't actually been passed.
Well,
They
Sid, I've got to say you're wrong, because what's very much more important than this is the doctoring of a picture by Kate. That's the real news that we have to put up with. You're going off piste here, Sid. Does it put things in proportion, doesn't it?
I mean, that's just utter nonsense, isn't it? I mean, it's so unimportant. It's not true. I mean, I mean, to her credit, she's completely honest about what she did. She said, yeah, I was playing with a picture. And yes, I did doctor it a little bit, but it's only a tiny, tiny bit. It's insignificant and unimportant. And it's like, it is insignificant and unimportant. And it's like, oh, and then we've got Megan from the United States saying, if we doctored a picture, we wouldn't have been treated the same way that she's being treated. It's just utter, utter nonsense. I mean, like you say, we need to talk about important things. But you see, to a certain extent, these things are brought up to divert attention away from important things because they don't want to talk about things like I've been talking about, the World Health Organization making decisions for the whole world on health. They want to try and bury that sort of thing. That's the news we don't want to talk about.
Well, we've got another subject here that has been half buried, we'll say, the decriminalisation of the abortion bill, the latest one. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, who's about as far left perhaps as you can go in the so-called Tory party, is getting her own way in 24 weeks, which it now is in Britain. Let me say at this stage, in most of other European countries, it's 12 weeks. That's half the time. When the abortion time limit has reached its conclusion, in effect, what this act is going to do is make it tenable till the full term, unless there are very grave extenuating circumstances. We're going from bad to worse. Of course, highlighted now is the fact that Sir Keir is cozying up to euthanasia in his talks with various personalities. This is going against, from a Christian point of view, Sid, everything that we know to be right and wrong. The state now has control of you from abortion to euthanasia.
Well, yes, and you see, you see what they're actually trying to do is to amend the criminal justice bill because they can't bring in a bill on abortion. The government doesn't want to bring it in, and a private member's bill isn't going to be brought in on abortion. So that's not a possibility. So they're trying to amend the criminal justice bill. Now, why on earth the government allow this to be amended, or how the speaker can allow this to be amended to bring in something which has got nothing whatsoever to do with the bill? I don't understand at all, frankly. But it looked as though the last thing I heard, by the way, as well, was that the whole debate had been postponed. It was going to be last week, but it didn't happen last week, and they postponed it several weeks. But it's still going to come in. I mean, the government can't be happy that their criminal justice bill is being used for bringing, well, attempting to bring in this extreme abortion up to birth. I mean, it's terrible, frankly, terrible. And they're also bringing in an amendment to reduce the number of weeks from 24 to 22, which is a very insignificant amendment, frankly. But it's on that point, it's also significant that this last week, Angela Rayner's been in the news because of not paying capital gain tax on a second property that she sold and pretending it was the house she was living in when she wasn't living in it. And during the discussion on that, Angela Rayner actually said that her last child, was born at 23 weeks, which was very traumatic for her. So she's had a child born at 23 weeks, but the abortion limit is 24. Well, she must support the reduction in the abortion limit, surely. But will she? No, no. I mean, it's like, I mean, the whole thing is just, the whole debate, frankly, is terrible, terrible. And the idea that you can be legally allowed to kill a child just before it's born because it might have Down syndrome or something and you didn't realize, I mean, or even after birth, you can give birth to a child because they're talking about repealing the Infancy Act, under which it was illegal to kill a child. They're talking about repealing that. So you can actually give birth. A mother can give birth and then say, "Oh, we found out the child's Down syndrome. Do you want it?" "No, I don't. So we'll kill it then." I mean, it's just horrendous, utterly, utterly horrendous. And it's not surprising that we as Christians are saying, what planet are we living on that we can kill babies or make it legal to kill babies like this? I mean, what planet are we living on? Do you not fear God? It's time for the nation. It's time for the nations of the world to fear God, I tell you.
Indeed. Sid, we're going to go to the Russell Group of universities, top ones. And you would have thought they'd had more common sense. Well, apparently they don't, because they're into microaggressions. Now, to interpret these euphemistic terms is quite simple. They want everybody protecting. They've even come up with phrases that you will not say in university because you'll get sanctioned. I'll read one of them as an illustration. White people can get killed by the police as well, Now, obviously, this is the George Floyd occurrence or reoccurrence, and they give a load of commandments that you can't say. Woke has gone on steroids big time at our universities, even the best ones. No wonder the kids that are coming out there and panic, fear, they're the ones that Labour are going to get for their MPs without any trading or significant life experiences. They're going to come straight out of university and become our leaders. Frightening. But the good news is that actually there's not many of them, but they still exist. There's something called CAF in the universities. It stands for Committee for Academic Freedom. And they are pushing back against these clowns and saying, they are professors, and they're saying, we've gone too far. Stop brainwashing our children.
Well, yes, you see, universities have always been a place for ideas and different ideas. I mean, I remember I spent 1 year when I was at university studying politics. I actually quite enjoyed it. But I realised it was all I was studying was political theory. I mean, which was most of the political theory they would teach us was complete nonsense. I mean, one of the lecturers was an anarchist, and he was trying to lecture us in his beliefs on anarchism. But at the end of the day, see, one of the things about academia is that you have to understand the way people think who don't agree with you. So you have to understand different arguments. So a student has to learn the point of view of an anarchist, even though they might think it's total nonsense. You learn the point of view of a Marxist. You learn the point of view of a Democrat. And you learn different points of view and how people think and how they come to their conclusions and why they come to those conclusions. And that's part of academia. So, it's important. It's a valuable process to go through. Once in academia, you start saying that attitude is not acceptable. No one can learn about that attitude. It's cancelled. Frankly, it's destroying study. It's destroying academia, frankly, and basically means that what people are doing is wrong. But you see, one of the ideas that they try and cancel is Christianity, frankly. And you see, that's why I say it's not free speech that we're interested in. What we're interested in is the right to tell the truth. And once you start saying you no longer have permission to tell the truth, because telling the truth is not an acceptable attitude in our university, then you're on terrible ground, frankly. You're on absolutely terrible ground. But this is what's been going on in America. And this is what I was talking about earlier, about how China, communist countries, have traditionally controlled the narrative. Russia controls the narrative. But for that controlling the narrative to now being spread to the United States of America and being spread around the West is a terrible thing, frankly. They're cancelling people that have got a point of view that you disagree with. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Right, we'll stick with diversity, inclusivity, and equality a little bit longer and look at the strange manner that our wonderful islands communities are working at in the disunited Kingdom. It's bizarre. We've got basically in Scotland, Hampshire. And I repeat what I said many times before, even for 10 years ago, a decade ago. If somebody would describe what I'm about to describe, they would be probably locked up and put away in a mental health institution. We have got now, as if it wasn't bad enough with the lovely Nicola, Hamza, who's out of a nation community with cultures that are not, dare I say, Scottish, pushing it there. We have now got a new chappie, Gethin, who's saying basically, I'm the first black king of a nation in the Western world. Said he's dangerous. He's got a terrible track record. He's extremely left, and he won by 51%. Well, one wonders about that, doesn't one, when looks at Mr. Putin and how he's got back in again. One wonders when you look at the history of the Welsh Parliament. They've got rid in the past of people that are not qualified by their colour, their creed even. And unless you're a socialist, forget Wales completely. And then can I pair this not with Northern Ireland, but with Southern Ireland? And one word encompasses all these new people, although Veradiga, of course, in Southern Ireland is having his second bite of the cherry. The one word is woke. These are extremely woke people. And one looks at Canada as the nearest example, where 70% of the nation of Canada desperately wants to get rid of Trudeau, son of Trudeau. But the wokes seem to be winning, Sid. Why?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons is, as you say, they managed to control elections, but, which is very, very concerning. Because you see, the thing about Christians is that we are honest, and honesty is an important part of our beliefs. I mean, in Islam, There isn't a belief in honesty. It's a good thing to lie to disbelievers to gain an advantage. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in elections. So there's no problem in Islam with rigging an election. And you don't have free and fair elections in Muslim countries. I mean, Israel is often referred to as the only democracy in the Middle East. So if you put the problems with dishonesty and then add into it the whole communist system, or Marxism, if you like, and the effect of control that Marxism has within the civil service, within the deep state in many countries, then you've got a very tough mix for people that are honest and people that are standing for truth to actually break through and to win the battles. But I mean, people that are honest and people that are truthful are fighting back. And you see, it's interesting. One of the things that I remember my professor of biblical studies used to say is the truth will always out. You know, you can't hide the truth forever. You can only hide the truth for a short period of time. You know, the truth will always come out. And this is what's happening all over the world right now. You see, they've desperately tried to control the narrative in the last election in 2020 in the United States. You know, they announced that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. It then comes out, you know, you had 50 senior people in the CIA and the FBI and all these sort of organizations who were all saying this is Russian disinformation, and then now say no, it was a lie. It wasn't Russian disinformation at all. And Biden was actually saying in the debates with Trump, you know, oh, that laptop is Russian disinformation. It's been, you know, there's all this, the CIA and the FBI, they're all willing to swear to it. You know, it's not truthful what you're saying. And, you know, it just turns out that Biden was blatantly lying. But, you know, his lies are exposed, totally exposed. And then, of course, what they're doing now is what they call lawfare. They're using the law to try and attack Trump left, right, and centre to try and stop him being on the ballot. But they're not winning, interestingly enough. You know, that's their agenda, and their agenda is being put forward. They tried to stop Trump being even allowed on the ballot, but the Supreme Court has basically now ruled and said, no, Trump must be allowed to go on the ballot. You know, and they've still got all these cases where they're trying to triple Trump financially. And some of those are still being heard, you know, but so far they're not winning. And it's happening in country after country where honest people are rising up against dishonest people. These people, Marxists, Muslims, I'm afraid they are dishonest. I mean, you might not like to say it, but that's the truth.
Sid, are you saying all Muslims are dishonest?
I'm saying that the religion, the basis of the religion is dishonest, and it's permissible to be dishonest in the religion. Of course, there are how can I put it? There are many Muslims that don't follow all the letters of the religion and that will be trustworthy and will be honest. Of course, there will be. But the fundamentals of the religion aren't honesty. And that's what I'm saying. And it's the same, I mean, you know, in Christianity, you know, the fundamentals of Christianity is you must tell the truth. Jesus said, I am the truth. But of course, there'll be people who say that they're Christians that are dishonest. I mean, that's the reality of it. Not everyone follows the religion totally as they should do. But, you know, if you're a Christian, you see, for many years in our country and in many countries around the world, if someone went to court and said, I'm a committed Christian, they would be immediately respected and honest as somebody is, you know, this is somebody we can rely on, this is somebody who's honest, you know, and they are respectable. But that's all completely gone now. You know, you go to court and you say, I'm a Christian, and they'll say, oh, you know, nutter. You know, it's just, that's the way our society's gone.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go to the most important item on the agenda today, Sid, and that's the greatest FA Cup. Well, it was a quarter-final, wasn't it? In living history. Did you watch it?
No, I was unfortunately I was in church and I didn't get back. I got back and my computer. I actually looked on the computer, and it said 3-3, Liverpool 3, Man United 3, and they're in the 120th minute. And I said to my wife, "Oh, they're going to go to penalties. It's 3-3, 120 minutes." And then suddenly it went to 4-3, and Man United scored in the last kick of the game. Incredible.
Well, despite VAR, despite ULEZ and everything else we're supposed to be obeying today, despite the fact that the FA Cup was brought down a peg or two in the last few years. Oh, it's not the competition it was. That was completely bypassed yesterday. It was a formidable and very enjoyable match, especially from in the Man U supporters like my good self. But you can get the average Joe, 70 odd thousand of them cheering a team. Nothing wrong with that. Perhaps we should do it more often. Perhaps we can learn from the facts that if we put, and I know you're a fan of VAR, and I wind you up about this because I'm not. If we put things in the way of true enjoyment, then perhaps we get what we deserve. Perhaps we can learn something from football. All the money that comes in from the Arab states, it is not and was not on display yesterday because neither Liverpool or Manchester United were or have been going down that route of being bought by another nation. See, in the end, maybe the righteous will win.
Well, what happened yesterday was that Man United really needed to win that game. Liverpool didn't. They've already won one trophy in the League Cup. They've got a very good chance of winning the league. They're doing very well in the Europa League, and got a very good chance of winning the Europa League. Man United were dismal in the Champions League, unfortunately, and didn't even manage to get into third place in the group. So they're completely out of Europe. They're unlikely to get in the Champions League and through the league, although they're probably going to get into the Europa League through the league. But they're in a poor position. They desperately needed to win that match to keep going in the FA Cup, and if they can win the FA Cup, then that'll be a successful season for them, despite everything. But they couldn't afford to go out. Liverpool didn't need to win it. And that's why you see the difference in the two teams, because Liverpool are undoubtedly the better team. But Man United fought harder. Since the draw, by the way, they've been drawn Coventry now in the semi-final. They are highly likely to make it into the final. So I think we're going to see Man United in the final. The other semi-final is Man City versus Chelsea. So, which is probably going to be a Manchester derby in the final. But again, you see, what I just said about Man United, Chelsea probably need to win that match more than Man City need to win it, because Man City are also going strong in the Premier League. They're going strong in the Champions League. At the time when we have the FA Cup final, if they're still in the Champions League, they'll probably be more concerned about winning that than the FA Cup. But who knows? I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Sometimes, if a team that's not such a good team, but they're more desperate to win the match, they can come through against a better team. That happens.
It does, but it doesn't happen in the United Kingdom in politics. Maybe we can learn, as I said previously, from the humble football match. If we are all behind one cause, Sid, then maybe it does work out that way. Thank you so much for today. We will see you next week.
Okay, thank you.